OTB in 10. Confusing playoff scenario chatter in at least 10 minutes. And we will start with the playoff picture because it's just that kind of week. But before I do, Garcia, how you doing out here on the West Coast? Happy Thanksgiving, by the way.
And a very happy Thanksgiving to you too, and to my fellow league owners who are having a great season. I'm thankful to just be a part of this group, and whether my record shows how abysmal it's been, at the end of the day, at least we're having fun. I think.
So something like that. Add me to the name slate there of just happy to be here, happy to talk about everybody else because that's where the two co-hosts are right now. And so we will spare no additional time and throw you right in to a chaotic playoff picture. It is remarkable. We thought we had a sense of things last week. We said we thought it might get more confusing. It did. It will only get more confusing as we extend into next week too. But what we'll do is tell you where we are and maybe where we think we're going. So hang tight. We'll do our best. We'll start with the current playoff picture as we see it today. Sweet Home Chicago, with the victory over All Aboard the Baby Bus last week, has not mathematically clinched the division, but all but basically clinched the division, right? So they've got 2 up with 2 to play because of their point total. If they can even just have moderately good weeks, they don't probably even need to win again to secure the division title. But it's not mathematically there, so we won't star it, but just know that that's the one thing that we probably do know with 2 weeks to go. Everything else is a mess. Wristbands beating Phil the Thrill. They're able to put themselves back into the 2 seed. But as you can see, we've got a bit of a cluster at 6 and 5. All Aboard the Baby Bus at your 3 seed. Phil the Thrill, the 4 seed. Now, there's a lot of different ways we can go. We're going to go to each path. We'll start by talking about the fact that All Aboard the Baby Bus and Phil the Thrill play each other this coming week. We'll talk more about that in a moment, but that means that this race will inevitably shake up again because my sources tell me somebody has to lose that game. So that should open the door for another team. Now, you may want to look at the in the hunt based on record category to see who that could open the door up. But I do want to point out one other thing. Waverman and Greatest Show on Paper, your current 5 and 6 seeds, are 5 and 6 as well. Okay, and because it's a interconference slate of games, no divisional teams play each other in week 12. And so here's what this means. This means that if Waverman or Greatest Show on Paper, because of their point total, if they win next week, there is a very good chance they have completely shaken up the race and jumped in to a wildcard seed based on record. Possibly, because let's go to the in the hunt based on record, where you'll see regulators after an abysmal week 11 putting themselves, unfortunately, currently out of the playoff picture, but close to PTT based on total points. Shipwreck is also 6 and 5. Gronk TDs is 5 and 6. Now, we put Cincinnati and Sidebar on this graphic, but for all intents and purposes, particularly for Sidebar because of their point total, it would be very tough for them to get in based on record because of the tie-breaking scenarios they'd have to get through. But they're, 1 game out technically, but trying to clear the deck a little bit by telling you that. I want to go to the Fairways Division race, so that's the next thing we'll do. Because, again, the Gardens Division race is pretty much over. Again, I don't want to say it for sure. I don't want to jinx anything. But Sweet Home Chicago is pretty much in lockstep for their 2nd consecutive Gardens Division title. Wristbands and PTT and everything else you see, that's where the mess is, right? So they're both 6 and 5. Wristbands has a small edge on PTT in points. Big enough to feel comfortable, but not big enough for us to declare anything, right? So, even if the 2 teams win, you still have to look at points to ensure the tiebreaker there. But again, I go back to Waverman and Greatest Show on Paper. 2 teams that could jump back into the race depending on the outcomes of next week. Waverman and Greatest Show on Paper, both, especially Waverman, have the point advantage on those 2 teams, so they would probably win tiebreakers. Certainly Waverman, probably Greatest Show on Paper, if they were to get in to a situation like that. All right, I want to go to in hunt based on points. And you may think this slide looks simple, but I will tell you why it isn't. So Greatest Show on Paper right now is up 44 points on Gronk if you want to see my TDs. Right now, that is the only team. If you remember last week, I said to you that I would take all teams off this graphic that are not within 75 points of the 6th seed. And so it looks simple, because it looks like it's just Gronk TDs and Greatest Show on Paper fighting for the 6th seed. However, as I had just stated to you, there is a chance that Waverman or Greatest Show on Paper could move into a wild card seed based on record next week, depending on what happens in these slate of games. Let me just give you an example of what would happen. So if Waverman or Greatest Show on Paper were to win their games next week, and let's just say that PTT is the one that loses the game against All Aboard the Baby Bus, well, here is how the points race shifts. All of a sudden, Gronk TDs, who's your current out of the playoff picture, and 5-6, well, they're the point leader right now of that group. And so again, we don't know exactly what will happen next week, but look at how this points race shifts with 4 other teams within 56 points of Gronk TDs. Phil the Thrill, Regulators, Cincinnati, that would be his best way in, and Shipwreck. So again, you have to keep your eye on a few different things. I will end with this before Garcia has, I'm sure, all kinds of comments for this convoluted playoff picture. What I will end with is trying to explain what each team should be most interested in their race to start next week. So if you're Sweet Home Chicago, if you're Waverman, and if you're Greatest Show on Paper, you pretty much don't have to worry about anything, right? You worry about putting up decent points each week, but right now you're all in very good positions to maintain your leads. Greatest Show probably the most vulnerable because they're still within striking distance of a few teams. But again, those 3 teams probably really only have to worry about putting up decent point weeks from here on out. If you're Wristbands, if you're All Aboard the Baby Bus, if you're Phil the Thrill, if you're Regulators, if you're Shipwreck, the first things you want to do each week is win. That is the most important thing because your clearest path in is winning. If you've won your contest, then you can kind of look over your shoulder to see where the points race are at. But those teams should probably be more focused on winning the games. And if you're Gronk, TDs, or Cincinnati in particular, you are most interested in what I would say points plus. So you want to score big points each week, and you want a few things in front of you to happen so that you could easily move back into one of the scenarios I described. I don't know if that was helpful or not, but I will pause. Garcia, what do you make of this remarkable playoff chase?
Remarkable is a good way to describe the chaos. The parity across the league is impressive, with the exception of maybe 2 teams down the bottom. I really thought we were going to have a little bit more of a clear path after Sunday, and look at the mess. It's as clear as mud. We still know who the best team is out there, and that's Sweet Home Chicago. There's no doubt. I thought All Aboard the Baby Bus had the better team going in this week, and he had a soft, if such a word could be used, for 100-point total plus. So it's impressive that Ian really is just kind of coasting now. He can rest his players if he wanted to. In fact, he probably should rest some players this week.
I love it because he's playing you. So
I don't know who his opponent is. I'm sure his opponent has no playoff implication. That's why I'm suggesting that. It's impressive because this is what makes the league so fascinating. But then we could solve so many issues if we just went to a 1-loss playoff format, which I'm sure now 9 league owners are in favor of. Will give us the majority vote, and we'll have a whole different conversation next year. PTT I thought was the better team going in, and Wristband somehow finds a way. So I don't know if that's just pure luck or just an off week for PTT. So still though, Ian's the best. Kudos to Carl, because I thought I had him, and this has been my season where I just get off to a hot start. I get these alerts that guys are scoring touchdowns, and I'm thinking, oh man, I must have like 80 points, and then I was stuck at like 26, which seemed like for a lifetime. And then I was projected to win, and then I wasn't projected to win. So, I'm not going to get into the whole thing that maybe the software is malfunctioning and probably should host a special press conference in front of, the Ritz Cracker building. But listen, this is what makes this sport so great. And, I'm just looking forward to just watching the rest of the season unfold. Again, still think Sweet Home Chicago is the team to beat. Shipwreck, way to get off the snide there. An impressive win. Didn't have the right quarterback when I last checked the roster. It seemed like his best quarterback was still on the bench. But he was able to pull together some solid numbers there. Your case, you got to at least feel better about yourself, knowing the fact that you didn't have the lowest point total for the season. No disrespect to Brian, but that was pretty impressive. More impressive than probably putting 200 points up. That is, I feel for him. One would wonder if he made any trades to improve his team going into the trade deadline. He did it like many other teams. So again, I will reiterate this over and over again. If you're looking at your roster right now and you're looking at the playoff situation, one would have to think that you would have been better off with Devontae Adams on your team.
A few things to unpack there, and thank you for getting in a few different shots. Appreciate all that. So yeah, if you're Shipwreck, and this is what we said. If you remember last week, we talked about how Shipwreck might, because of some of the scenarios in which other teams that are playing each other, and because of who Shipwreck plays, they leapfrog Gronk. If you want to see my TDs on record last week, they'll play WB and all aboard the baby bus to end the season. So Shipwreck, for as much as you can control anything in this game, just because someone's on the other side of your screen doesn't really mean you have control. But for the points of control in fantasy football, Shipwreck, I still think, is in this weird position, I put it back up on the screen here, where they could control their fate maybe a little bit more than others if you believe an 8-5 record will be enough to get you in. That's probably the case. Now, again, I say probably because, there are still a lot of other scenarios that could be unpacked here. And if you think about it this way, as much as we want to talk about Waverman and Great Show, how they could potentially be the guys to look over your shoulder at, that they're coming on strong, they're still in the deficiency column of wins and losses. So if the teams, like I had said, just take care of business, win their games, it doesn't matter how many points that Waverman or Great Show on paper score, they just can't catch you because of the record. However, if you are a 5-6 team, obviously that's not the case because they are 5-6 as well. But if you're a 6-5 team, right now, again, your only thought, to try to clarify, is just win your game. Win your game, score some good points, and then take a look around and see, because a lot of teams are close in that 6-5 range. A lot of teams have very similar point totals, so it's not to say that if you are 6-5 and you win and all the teams in front of you are winning, it's not to say that you can't jump them based on a point tiebreaker. But again, a lot will probably change after all this next week.
I guess, not to beat a dead horse while it's dead, I think individual players from the Seattle Seahawks team had more total points individually than regulators did for a combination of time.
It's a tough.
As Joe Girardi used to say, it's not what you want.
I will tell you, and again, this is also sitting from someone who also had a tough week this year in points. When you are having a down point week like that, like we just saw with regulators, I mean, it's crippling because you know how important points are in this league. It's not a situation where you can say, okay, it's one bad week, because it is. It's just one bad week, and you can move on. You can't really move on. It follows you for the rest of the season now. And because of some of the other issues regulators has with, Christian McCaffrey, your boy, Raheem Mostert, they don't look like they're walking through that door very soon.
Mostert's on his team?
That's what I'm told. And if they are walking through that door, they're doing it on crutches. So I don't know how you feel right now.
Who's on my team then?
I don't know who's on your team. I have no idea who's on your team.
But you know what? Here's the one thing. If there's anything I'm going to learn from this is your monologue about the point totals and how the implications for the playoff. Brian's going to probably now vote for the format just because of that. You sold me and sold him that it's clear that this point total thing doesn't make any sense.
Well, it's possible that he will feel that way. We'll have to ask him. But we're going to move on to some individual conversations, some individual matchups this week. Because again, we could go a million different ways. There's a lot of intriguing contests. We're going to start with, I think, what is the biggest one, and it's the one we described. Again, put the playoff picture up again for a second here. All aboard the baby bus and Phil the Thrill play this week. That means that one of those teams probably is not going to be, at least in the wildcard record based on the record, that is, the wildcard seats based on record, they probably won't be there next week with all the other teams that are angling for that spot. So it's a big matchup, and it's the matchup that should, wreak the most havoc depending on the outcome. Garcia, let's call it a playoff game. Not to say that the other team can't get in and won't get in, but let's call it a playoff game right now. Who do you like in the all aboard the baby bus, Phil the Thrill Week 12 matchup?
I look at the players and who they've got on the roster and what their matchups are. I do not like all aboard the baby bus's matchup with Mahomes going up against Tampa Bay's defense. I think Dalvin Cook is going against the Carolina Panthers. Meanwhile, PTT's got Josh Allen, who, let's face it, he'd be right there along the surprises of the year in terms of his output. But he's got an LA Chargers defense that let Joe Flacco throw the ball around like he was, back in his Baltimore Ravens days. So that's a better matchup for him. But, there's a lot to be said that all aboard the baby bus kind of has the right formula in having that 1-2 punch, and then everyone else just kind of gets their 8, 9, 12, 15 points. So I think it's going to be a hotly, closely contested. And I think when it's all said and done, because of the favorable individual matchups, PTT is going to come away with a very slight margin, maybe by 1 or 2 points when it's all said and done. So if there's one game of the week to watch, it's that.
Yeah, it's tough. It's a debate show. We're supposed to pick one or the other. I'm kind of with you in that this is a toss-up game. I think this is what makes it so intriguing. Both teams have a couple of guys that have the ability to somewhat win you a week, right? Dalvin Cook and Patrick Mahomes, obviously, on the all aboard the baby bus side. For PTT, Travis Kelce finally coming on strong. I think he has got back-to-back 20-point weeks now. Josh Allen, as you said, very true. 30-plus points in a given week is routine for him. Michael Thomas, obviously, maybe not in that league winner category right now based on what we're seeing in this new look Saints offense, but obviously based on target share alone last week, you have to feel good about him providing for your lineup week in and week out now. So it is a tough one. I think there is a variable here, and it's actually two variables, and this is what I think could make the difference. Is the Seattle defense and the Carolina defense what we saw last week? And maybe for a couple weeks, but mostly last week. Is that an anomaly? Or have they, finally kind of found themselves because they both were obviously in states of disarray? Maybe some pieces are being put together. Seattle obviously had some acquisitions. Carolina put in a whole new system with rookies, so it's possible that it took them half a year to figure it out. I say that because All Aboard the Baby Bus has a very important series of games with Fulgham playing against Seattle and with Moore playing with Cook playing against Carolina's defense. So the question now becomes, is what we saw last week an anomaly? And will they get shredded again this week? Or have they started to figure something out? Because that might cap the upside of a few of All Aboard the Baby Bus's traditionally high upside players.
And the name for All Aboard the Baby Bus is Miles Sanders going up against that Seattle defense. Carson Wentz, a former player of mine, it's clear he is not the Carson Wentz of 2-3 years ago when they went on to that Super Bowl run led by Nick Foles. So if I'm a defense, I'm basically saying, well, Carson Wentz has to beat me because he hasn't shown that he can beat anybody this year. So that doesn't bode well for him. And to your point about Michael Thomas, you'd rather have Michael Thomas on the team, not knowing what you're going to get based on just kind of the new look offense for the Saints, rather than having him on the bench, although you probably be more comfortable in having Michael Thomas set up alongside Devontae Adams, say, on your roster than not having Devontae Adams. And you probably, if you're, Frankie all aboard the baby bus, you probably feel better about having a third superstar on your team than just running with a 2-person superstar team. So, things for them to think and ponder about, well after the trade deadline when they had every opportunity to make me an offer and they didn't.
I love that we always bring up you. By the way, we're going to move on to the next topic. You drifted a little bit. Take a one step to your left as we continue these conversations because we want to make sure, obviously, we don't want to not have you in front.
I drifted a little because I'm falling asleep every time you talk. I'm going to be here a while. So,
all right, don't worry. We're moving on. Last topic. Don't worry. Here we go. We're going to move on to our current number 5 and number 6 seeds. They don't play each other this week, so you may ask yourself, why are we pitting them together? Well, if you look at it over the course of the last month, these are 2 of your top 4 highest scoring point teams. You may not be surprised that one of them is Waverman because Waverman has been consistently there. We've maybe even taken Waverman for granted this year. They've been so consistently dominant because of the the win-loss issues. We probably haven't focused enough on them, but they're the only team now that has been in the playoff picture every single week this year. However, Greatest Show on Paper coming on strong, back-to-back big point weeks. They picked up one of the best waiver wire quarterbacks and really one of the best quarterbacks, period, this season in Justin Herbert. They've got Nick Chubb back. Aaron Jones, obviously, back from injury. They've got some complementary players that are starting to emerge. And so here's the question, Garcia. If you had to pick one of these teams to win the division, to jump, obviously each other, as well as to jump WB and PTT, who would you pick? And I will say one last thing for frame of reference to kind of continue this narrative. In Week 13, Waverman plays PTT, and Greatest Show on Paper plays wristbands. We couldn't ask for a better series of 4 matchups So who do you like if you had to pick one to end up sneaking in to a Fairways Division title?
Well, after my performance against Waverman, where I again thought 111 plus points would do it, it's impressive of what he's been able to put together. And we were worried about Derrick Henry, if he's really going to be the Derrick Henry what we saw in the playoffs, and we've been proven wrong that he is a formidable fantasy player throughout the entire season. That he's not a one-trick pony, that he only kind of shows up when it matters in the playoff format. Also he's been able to really ride the Russell Wilson, train, and while it wasn't a great performance last week, it was enough for him to get enough points to win. I had my doubts with Greatest Show on paper. I didn't think he had a solid roster. I think they were kind of just flying by the plan, by their seat based on Justin Herbert. But to your point, he keeps impressing, and it's getting to the point now where you got to take them realistic to be a playoff contender and possibly make a run. With that line of Aaron Jones, Nick Chubb, Michael Evans, and the list goes on and on. So one concern I have when it comes to Greatest Show on paper, it's a two-headed monster. And if those guys don't talk to each other, there could be some mishaps. The other thing, too, is I don't know how often Greatest Show on paper actually looks at the league app, if they pay attention to who's on whose roster, things like that, because sometimes you get a weird text message early in the morning, making a trade offer, again, for guys who are not on your roster. This is what I'm hearing.
So for just to make sure we have this right, though,
from personal experience, sort of.
Just to make sure we have this right, are you saying that a franchise texted you after the trade deadline was over to trade for a player you don't have? Is that what we're hearing from you?
It is. No. I mean, it's twofold. All right. I mean, one, it's like after the trade deadline, which people would be like, hey, deadlines. They're, it's kind of like projects. Like, oh, yeah, it's due by this date. It's like schoolwork. You get it in when you get it in. When it comes to the NFL trade deadline for our fantasy league, it's locked in step. You can't mess around it. But when you add in a trade offer for somebody who is not on that person's team, it's just kind of like, are we really paying attention? I worry if those two people are really talking to themselves. And I really get worried now when it comes to league voting, if they're really, properly doing the necessary action to make a substantial, vote, one that actually has a conscious of what they're doing and choosing for or against. So we need to kind of put the spotlight on that team and just make sure the fact that they're well. I'm a little worried. I know things are crazy, but we should probably check on them. Maybe just, knock on their door or send them a text, see how they're doing, just to make sure that things are going well. Because there's a lot of things that happen during the course of the year. That one's going to probably stay in my brain for a long time.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And I got to say, I mean, kudos to both these clubs. So both these teams had obviously disappointing 2019 campaigns. For Greatest Show on paper, it was the repeat season they were hopeful for, right? That didn't work out. They had one in 2018, had a very disappointing 2019. Waverman, so many consecutive years of just being right there, and then to obviously have really been kind of out of the playoff picture earlier than is traditional for them last year. They both have come on very strong. It's tough for me to parse and parcel between these two teams because they're both so solid. I think I'll take a slight edge to Greatest Show on paper, actually, right now, if, and there's a big if, Antonio Gibson and DeAndre Swift obviously has to come back from a concussion. If those two players continue to do, I don't think a lot of people realize they were in the top 10 in running backs over the past month. Obviously, Swift probably isn't anymore because of missing last week, but they were starting to really contribute. And if you wanted to look for a club that did it the best, if you're like, hey, who tried to have a running back focused lineup and succeeded most of all in 2020 in OTB, it's Greatest Show on paper right now because they have four very good running backs if they're all healthy. I mean, again, we can talk about Nick Chubb obviously having Kareem Hunt cut into his value every week. We can also talk about Aaron Jones, being very consistent, but he's not the Aaron Jones that I had been accustomed to last year, and maybe that's a good thing because my Aaron Jones last year was an RB1 plus on some weeks and an RB 72 on other weeks. I mean, it was just such a dramatic pendulum shift. This year, it's been very much more RB1, RB2 every week. He had that one monster week in week 2. Everything else has been fine. And maybe that's actually what you need when you've got a solid lineup from top to bottom. You maybe want the guy that's going to give you 14, 15 guaranteed versus maybe 3, maybe 40. I don't know. Waverman, I think you're right. I think they still got a very, very solid group of guys with Derrick Henry and Adam Thielen chief among them. But it does seem to still come down to what does Russ and DK do every week? Do they do enough to carry the team? And carry is a little bit of a strong statement for a team that's leading the league in points. But hey, as you get into a playoff situation, you're going to be playing teams that you'd expect will challenge you, put up 115, 120 points. Well, then that all of a sudden makes it so that you get one bad game from those two players. You're a little more exposed maybe than other teams that don't have that double up, so to speak. So I think it's a tough one, and I think, again, I'll be very interested to see. So a slight edge, maybe Greatest on paper, but Waverman, I mean, it's tough to really pick against either one.
You got to be careful with Thielen. He's on the COVID watch list or on the whatever reserve list, so that's a game time decision. But give credit to Waverman. He actually had a New York Jet on his roster this last week, and he won. So
he loves that New York Jet.
When you're good, you're good. When you're Carl, you're lucky.
Oh, I love it. Well, he is Garcia out on the West Coast. Sidebar on the East Coast. 2 weeks to go, and I promise you, it will probably get more confusing. But it'll probably get more confusing next week. We'll be here, trying to talk you through it. Trust us, we've got nothing else to do at this point but look at your lineups. So that's what we'll be doing, trying to figure it out. Best of luck on the waiver wire this week. Happy Thanksgiving again to all league managers. We will see you again on Tuesday to talk more OTB in 10.